Charlie, how was the stage?
Good, huh? Wait till that thing blinks.
Charlie Brown, Houston, they got staging. They had a wild gyration, though, but they got it under control, over.
This is NBC News. The flight of Gemini 11, Robert Gorelski with Jay Barbary reporting from the NBC News Space Center. We're only minutes away from the scheduled liftoff of the Atlas-Agena target vehicle. We are at T-minus 8 minutes and 42 seconds and counting. We are 124 minutes away from the scheduled liftoff of the astronauts Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon. The astronauts are now sitting up in their spacecraft atop the Titan II booster rocket, and everything this morning is proceeding smoothly. There were two minor hitches. The clocks had to be synchronized at one point. Then a sliver of metal was found in the Atlas-Agena, but this poses no problems. They have isolated the metal, and the countdown is proceeding. It had rained at Cape Kennedy during the night, but now broken clouds are indicated at the scheduled liftoff times, and weather will pose no problem. NBC's coverage of Gemini 11 will continue after this message. And the dual countdowns are continuing smoothly at Cape Kennedy. We are only 7.5 minutes from the scheduled liftoff of the Atlas-Agena target vehicle, and astronauts Conrad and Gordon are in the spacecraft ready to be launched into space 97 minutes after their target vehicle is lifted off. And Jay, everything is working beautifully this morning.
Couldn't be going better at this time, Bob. Everything right on schedule. They had this minor delay earlier this morning when the astronauts were taking their physicals. 4-minute delay, but they made up the time. No problems. Everything on schedule. The Atlas-Agena is sitting on its pad, venting properly now. It has been fueled. The liquid oxygen is aboard to keep the kerosene-type fuel burning during its ride into orbit. The astronauts have been sealed inside of the Gemini 11 spacecraft. They're keeping in touch with the countdown as it continues. And in just about, if I can figure here quickly, 6 minutes, the Atlas-Agena should be lifting off for its flight into space.
At the moment, we are 6 minutes away from the scheduled liftoff of the Atlas-Agena and 101 minutes away from the scheduled liftoff of the astronauts Conrad and Gordon. The astronauts are atop the Titan II booster rocket in the spacecraft on Pad 19. On Pad 14, the Atlas-Agena is poised for liftoff, now exactly 6 minutes away. Everything proceeded well this morning. There were these minor hitches that we've talked about before. And, of course, everybody was keeping their ear tuned to reports from Jack King and Gemini Control on any unscheduled announcements. He did come up with a one hold, which lasted exactly 4 minutes, but this posed no problem. Everything proceeding smoothly at this point.
Bob, the big interest here at launch will be whether or not there is indeed a problem with the autopilot in the Atlas-Agena rendezvous target rocket. This signal was flashed about 25 minutes before liftoff Saturday, which prompted the second postponement in this mission. They found out over the weekend, after careful investigation, that they received this signal falsely, that what happened was that the winds were blowing harder than expected here, plus a vent valve of the liquid oxygen was opened too quickly, and it set up a vibration in the rocket itself. And at that time, they got this false reading. We have a report now coming in from Gemini Launch Control. The space agency spokesman there is Jack King.
This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 100 minutes and counting, T-minus 100. And we're 5 minutes away from the planned Atlas-Agena liftoff. We have a clearance to launch as far as the range is concerned, and the Agena second stage is now on internal power. The clock that will direct the burning of the Agena engine later in the powered flight already has started. It starts at about T-minus 7 minutes. At Launch Complex 19, we are taking a close look at the command pilot's hatch. At the present time, we're going to see whether we do have a problem or not, but the count is still going at this time. We're now at T-minus 99 minutes, 21 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control. We now have opened the hatch, the command pilot's hatch, as we're just a matter of 4 minutes away from the Atlas-Agena liftoff. We are still counting. We do not know whether, at this point, whether a hole will be declared or not. The countdown is continuing. The hatch is opened as they check the seal on the command pilot's side. Now, T-minus 99 minutes and counting, 4 minutes away from the planned Atlas-Agena liftoff. Our reports from Complex 14 all still going well with the Atlas-Agena at this time. We will stand by to check our problem with the command pilot's hatch. We're now at 98 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control.
So attention is now directed to the 100-foot level on pad 19, where the astronaut, the command astronaut's hatch, Charles Conrad's hatch, has been opened, and technicians are checking the seal around it. Now, however, they seem to be reclosing it. We can see from the NASA television camera, the monitor, which we can observe the action at the 100-foot level, that they're about to close the hatch again. At least they've moved it closer to closing it. We're only a little more than 3 minutes away from the scheduled liftoff of the Agena. Now they've resealed the hatch on the command pilot's side. Technicians have closed it again, and we don't know if this is a hopeful indicator or not. We hope that it is. But the hatch now has been resealed. Technicians are working on it. As Jack King indicated, didn't know if this would cause any problem or not, but the countdown is continuing. We are now 2 minutes and 40 seconds away from the scheduled liftoff of the Atlas-Agena. The Atlas, of course, is on pad 14. On pad 19 are the astronauts, Conrad and Gordon. They'll be going up 97 minutes after the Agena is lofted into space. We're 2 minutes and 23 seconds away from the Agena liftoff on pad 19. The technicians have sealed the hatch of the spacecraft on the command pilot's side, and Jack King has indicated they are not sure if this will pose a problem, but the countdown is continuing. We are now 2 minutes and 5 seconds away from the scheduled liftoff of the Atlas-Agena on pad 14. The countdown is continuing. The hatch problem, if there was one at all, apparently is not a problem at all.
Someone, Bob, is going to have to make a... let's hear from Jack King.
Because of a problem with the command pilot's hatch at the White Room at Launch Complex 19. It appears to be concerned with the seal that helps close the hatch and helps to give us our pressurized condition in the spacecraft. We opened it shortly, about 2 minutes ago to take another look. The hatch was reclosed, but it appears we still have a difficulty. We are going to hold the Atlas-Agena launch until we determine our status with the command pilot's hatch of the Gemini 11 spacecraft. The count now has been recycled to T-minus 103 minutes. This brings us back to just the time before the Agena second stage goes on internal power. We've taken the power off the batteries on the Agena, and we are back on external power at Complex 14 at this time. This leaves us 8 minutes and holding as far as the Atlas-Agena is concerned, as we take a closer look at the command pilot's hatch on the Gemini 11 spacecraft. T-minus 103 minutes and holding. This is Gemini Launch Control.
And so we were only minutes away from the scheduled liftoff of the Atlas-Agena, and a problem developed in the seal around the hatch on the command pilot's side of the spacecraft, and we have a hold.
Well, Bob, I think we should point out here the seal around the hatch is there for one major reason. When the spacecraft goes into orbit, the astronauts have to take a hunk of the Earth's atmosphere, so to speak, along with them. This seal naturally has to hold the pressure inside the spacecraft, because in the vacuum of space there is no pressure. Here on Earth, our pressure is 15 pounds per square inch on the average. The astronauts keep 5 pounds per square inch on their bodies inside of the Gemini 11 when they're in orbit, about 1/3 the normal atmospheric pressure here on Earth. And delays, this is the third delay for this mission so far, and they have been common throughout the Gemini program, starting right from the Gemini 2, which was the second mission, but it was unmanned. It was delayed a month because of a booster failure. Gemini 4, this was astronaut Ed White, and astronaut Ed White and Jim McDivitt's flight, it was delayed an hour and 15 minutes. Here is another report from Jack King.
Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 103 minutes and counting in the overall simultaneous countdown, and T-minus 103 minutes and holding on the overall countdown, T-minus 8 minutes and holding for the Atlas-Agena. Our problem is concerned with the command pilot's hatch of the Gemini 11 spacecraft. After the hatches were closed, the crew in the White Room goes through a series of leak checks around the spacecraft. They determined that they apparently had a slight leak on the command pilot's side. The hatch was reopened, checks were made of the seal, and the hatch was closed again. This came about 2 minutes before the planned Atlas-Agena liftoff as the countdown was continuing, and a determination was made to hold the countdown to ensure that that hatch will be okay for launch. The crew is still making the checks in the White Room at this time, and we are standing by for a further report on the command pilot's hatch. T-minus 103 minutes and holding. This is Gemini Launch Control.
We can tell you further. We are watching a television monitor which is showing us pictures being taken by NASA cameras at the 100-foot level in the White Room. The hatch on the command pilot's side is closed, and technicians are working on it now. They're feeling around the side to find out perhaps if they can detect that leak, and there are other ways of doing it, I'm sure. But we are T-minus 8 minutes away from the scheduled blast-off of the Atlas-Agena, but we are holding, which means that we don't know how soon it will be before the Atlas-Agena is launched. We are T-minus 103 minutes and holding on the scheduled liftoff of the astronauts. Jay, what might they do at this point?
Well, they will keep checking the hatch here and see if they can secure this bonding around the hatch door itself to see if they can correct this problem with the leaks. Of course, if they cannot, it's safe to say, without a doubt, that they cannot fly again today. And here we are with the third bugaboo in this Gemini 11 mission. The first, as I'm sure most will recall, was last Friday when a pinhole leak was discovered in the oxidizer fuel tank on the Gemini Titan II booster rocket. That postponed us 24 hours. Saturday we had the false signal of a faulty part in the Atlas-Agena target rocket's autopilot, and here we are again today, just moments away from launching the Atlas-Agena, and now we have problems back on Complex 19, the spacecraft itself, the left hatch of the Gemini 11, which belongs to command pilot Charles Conrad. The technicians in the White Room have closed it again now. They are checking again to see if they can pressurize properly inside the spacecraft to see if these leaks still hold. Of course, the biggest consideration, we're going to get another report now from Jack King, who is in Gemini Launch Control.
This is Gemini Launch Control. We're still at T-minus 103 minutes and holding in the overall count, T-minus 8 minutes and holding for the Atlas-Agena launch vehicle. The crewmen in the White Room at the 100-foot level at Launch Complex 19 still making close checks of the command pilot, that is Pete Conrad's hatch. After it was closed, they determined that there was a possible leak. They double-checked the seal, that coating that's inside that connects with the hatch when it closes, and are still continuing their checks now to verify that hatch for flight. We will not go ahead with the plan to launch the Atlas-Agena until we are assured that the Gemini spacecraft is also in a go condition. Still holding at this time. We recycled, as reported earlier, back to the 103-minute mark in the count so that we could go back on ground power with the batteries in the Agena second stage. At this point, and when we do resume the countdown at 103, the Agena goes on internal power. We want to conserve that battery power, so we recycled to this point. Still T-minus 8 minutes and holding for the Atlas-Agena launch as we make further checks of the Gemini spacecraft. This is Gemini Launch Control.
So sad to report the story this morning is one of time retrogression. We were only 2 minutes away from the scheduled liftoff of the Atlas-Agena a short time ago, and now we're back to T-minus 8 minutes and holding. The problem, a leak in the hatch on the command pilot side of the spacecraft. And Jay, I suppose the question now is, how much time will they have this morning to repair the problem before they have to make the decision on whether to scrub it?
Bob, we go right back to the same problem we had here Saturday, and that is simply that the mission calls for a first orbit rendezvous, the quickest yet plan. In order to do this, the astronauts want this first orbit to have the proper daylight and night side so that they can use star navigation as a backup system in order to compute their position for the rendezvous with the Agena over Hawaii. Each hour and a half they delay, this changes their orbital daylight and night sides about 3 minutes. So they can tolerate up to about 6 minutes, which is 2 hours, 2 hours and a half, and that's about the maximum that the pilots want to tolerate for this quick rendezvous. The big problem here is the fact that they planned to open the hatch in space, not this one, the right-hand hatch, which belongs to pilot Richard Gordon, for an hour and 47-minute spacewalk, and also for a 2 hour and 20-minute stand-up EVA, extravehicular activity. And these hatches have to work properly because when they depressurize the Gemini 11 in orbit, they go outside for the spacewalk, come back in, close the hatches in space. They have to seal properly. They have to make sure that there's no problem at all. So this problem will indeed be given the utmost serious consideration here this morning before this mission is committed to launch on this third attempt.
Jay, I remember asking you on Friday, and we had a problem at that time, what might be the problem, and you said there could be 1,000 things, and I think we may go through all 1,000 before Gemini 11 is finally launched. This is the third one now. The hatch on the command pilot's side is not sealed properly.
It's beginning to seem that way, that's for sure, Bob. The launch crew here, great guys, and they work hard, and it's beginning to tax them mentally. But it's sort of like buying a brand new car and taking the family out for a ride the first time and having several things go wrong with it.
To repeat, there's nothing wrong with the Atlas-Agena. Here's King now.
This is Gemini Launch Control. We're still at T-minus 103 minutes and holding, T-minus 8 minutes and holding as far as the Atlas-Agena is concerned at pad 14. It has just been recommended, and the determination has been made that we're going to pick up the countdown shortly, maybe in about 30 or 40 seconds from this time. The spacecraft test conductor has reported that he will be able to give us an exact status about 4 minutes from this time. So we do not have a complete read-off on that hatch yet, but we plan to continue the count. It is expected and hoped that some 4 minutes after we pick up the count, we will get a go from the spacecraft and be able to continue down with the Atlas-Agena countdown. We're going to pick up the countdown here shortly. 5 seconds from this time. T-minus 103 minutes and counting. T-minus 103 and counting. T-minus 8 minutes and counting for the Atlas-Agena. The Agena second stage now is going back on internal power on the flight batteries there. The checks continue of the command pilot, Pete Conrad's hatch, at Complex 19, and we're looking to a report from the spacecraft test conductor about 3 or 4 minutes from this time. Now, T-minus 102 minutes, 33 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control.
Well, that encouraging report from Jack King, the countdown has resumed, and we are now only 7 minutes and 22 seconds away from the liftoff of the Atlas-Agena, 102 minutes away from the liftoff of the astronauts Conrad and Gordon. The problem of the hatch sealing on the command pilot's side apparently has been corrected, and the countdown is continuing.
The decision here, Bob, which has to be made yet on whether or not this hatch will seal properly, will have to be made about T-minus 4. We're going to have another report. We've just been informed coming up from Jack King in Gemini Launch Control, hopefully with further information on whether or not the seal has been sealed properly. Here is Jack King.
This is Gemini Launch Control, now 6 minutes, 38 seconds away from the planned Atlas-Agena launch at Complex 14. The spacecraft test conductor at 19 reports that we have a preliminary go for the Gemini spacecraft. This is after some checks of the command pilot's hatch, which created the hold a matter of minutes ago. We're now counting, and we appear to have a go for the Atlas launch. At Complex 14, now that we have resumed the count, the checkout appears to be going well. As reported, the Agena second stage now is on internal power. All systems looking good at this point. Now, T-minus 101 minutes and 2 seconds and counting. T-minus 6 minutes and counting at this point for the Atlas-Agena launch. This is Gemini Launch Control.
So things have now turned for the better again. Jack King indicates that we have a preliminary go on the scheduled liftoff of the Gemini 11. Apparently that problem has been corrected enough to the satisfaction of the scientists that the countdown is continuing. We are 5.5 minutes away from the liftoff of the Atlas-Agena, 100 minutes away from the liftoff of the astronauts Conrad and Gordon. The countdown has continued after a momentary lull there. They held back, but now the countdown is proceeding. You're listening to NBC Radio's coverage of Gemini 11 from the NBC News Space Center.
We now pause 10 seconds for station identification.
This is WMAQ AM and FM Chicago, 63 degrees at 8 o'clock.
Robert Goralski.
Launch Control, T-minus 5 minutes and counting. T-minus 5 for the Atlas-Agena launch, and we are go for the Atlas-Agena. We are go both at Launch Complex 19 and 14. We've received another report on the status of that hatch, and it is good. Our countdown now is proceeding. We're now at 4 minutes and 40 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control.
So we have a go for the Gemini 11 at this point. The Atlas-Agena is only 4.5 minutes away from blast-off. The astronauts themselves are in the spacecraft atop their Titan II booster rocket. They're 99 minutes away from scheduled liftoff, and everything looks well after that problem that developed in the hatch in the command pilot side of the spacecraft. 4 minutes and 12 seconds away from the liftoff of the Agena at this point. Everything is going well. Now we'll get another report from Jack King in Gemini Control.
This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 4 minutes and counting. T-minus 4 for the Atlas-Agena, all still going well. We're aiming for a liftoff time of 5 minutes past the hour. 5 minutes past the hour. At this point in the countdown, as reported, the Agena second stage is on internal power. And coming down during the final phases of the count, we'll cover some of the highlights to you because they will come rather fast as the real time occurs. We're now 3 minutes and 34 seconds away from the planned liftoff. The Agena destruct system will be armed at the 3-minute mark. The liquid oxygen tanking will be secured at 2 minutes and 10 seconds. That will give us a launch vehicle weighing some 267,000 pounds sitting at Launch Complex 14. We're now 3 minutes and 15 seconds away from the launch, all still going well at this time. Further down in the count, the ignition system is armed for the Atlas. It goes on internal power at T-minus 1 minute and 40 seconds. Now coming up on T-minus 3 minutes mark. T-minus 3 minutes and counting. T-minus 3. As we continue further down in the count, the automatic sequencer comes in at the 18-second mark of the Atlas countdown. From that point on down, all is automatic, and it's climaxed by the ignition sequence starting at 4 seconds before liftoff. Those two vernier engines will ignite on the side of the Atlas. As soon as they reach proper pressure, this will have the sequencer follow through to ignite the twin boosters and the sustainer engine, generating some 390,000 pounds of thrust. Now 2 minutes, 25 seconds away from the Atlas-Agena liftoff. This is Gemini Launch Control.
So we've had 2 holes this morning, but now the countdown is continuing for the scheduled liftoff of the Agena. We are 2 minutes and 13 seconds away from scheduled liftoff. The problem of the hatch, not on the Atlas-Agena, but on the Titan II, the Gemini 11 spacecraft, where a hatch developed on the command pilot side. But that apparently has been corrected to the satisfaction of space agency officials, and the countdown for this morning's complex mission is continuing. We are now 1 minute and 52 seconds away from the scheduled liftoff of the Agena, and as Jack King indicated just a moment ago, everything is proceeding smoothly. The astronauts are in their spacecraft atop their Titan II booster, and they are listening, as we are, to see if there are any further complications will develop. None so far. The Atlas-Agena is moving toward a liftoff 1.5 minutes from now. Everything is proceeding satisfactorily. The weather at Cape Kennedy is good. Few broken clouds. The rain that Cape Kennedy experienced overnight has disappeared. The weather forecasters were correct. It's a clear day. It's a good day for a launch, and we are now 1 minute and 15 seconds away from the scheduled blast-off of the Agena. Now, Jay Barbary is in an excellent position to give us a report on how it is on Pad 14. Jay, come on in.
Well, Bob, here at the moment, as always, thousands of people have moved out of the buildings here on Cape Kennedy. They're out to watch the launching take place. This is the third attempt, and hopefully the lucky one today. The hatch has been sealed properly on Pad 19 on the Gemini 11 spacecraft, and now the pressurization inside the big, tall Gemini, or Atlas-Agena rocket, rather, is taking place. The liquid oxygen vent valves are being closed. The pressure is building up, and we are now just 33 seconds away from the moment of launch. We're going to be getting the final moments of the countdown from Jack King in Gemini Launch Control, who has all of the instruments on the countdown coming into his position. So for the final countdown, we switch to Jack King.
T-minus 18 seconds and counting. We have the sequencer in. T-minus 15. All still looking good. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 1. We have ignition.
And we have a liftoff. The Atlas-Agena rocket rises off its pad here. It has a big spout of fiery flame coming out of the bottom. It's a smooth liftoff. And the big question here this morning is whether or not this autopilot will indeed work as it should. And it appears to be now as the Atlas-Agena climbs to the sky, headed for a thin layer of cloud. Lit now by the bright sun shining through a big hole in the clouds as it continues to climb straight up. It's a beautiful launch, everything going true and smooth at this moment. The Atlas-Agena is on its way into an orbit 185 miles above the Earth, where the Agena target satellite should be orbited to become the rendezvous target for Gemini 11. Astronauts Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon are watching the liftoff, or listening to it, we should say, in their Gemini 11 spacecraft on Pad 19. The Atlas-Agena has passed through the thin layer of clouds overhead. We can just see a tiny fire dot in the sky. It is now fading from our view, but in the Mission Control Center in Houston is Jack Riley. Jack has all the instruments and readings coming into him to keep up with this flight, so let's pick up his official report.
Still looking good. 1 minute, 20 seconds. Atlas-Agena 10 miles high now. About 15 miles downrange.
This is Jack Riley reporting from the Mission Control Center in Houston. The Atlas-Agena faded from our view about 1 minute after liftoff because of the thin clouds overhead.
1 minute, 42 seconds. Still looking good. Velocity 5,000 feet per second, building towards 6.
The three big engines of the Atlas booster rocket are still burning. They're pushing the Agena target vehicle onward into space. They will be burning out here shortly in about
Looks
5
good for
seconds.
Pico, booster engine cut off.
Booster engine cut off.
Outboard booster engines have fallen away. Velocity is 10,000 feet per second now. Atlas-Agena driving on up with the sustainer engine.
This sustainer engine with 60,000 pounds of thrust will continue to burn for another 2 minutes or so before it cuts off and the Agena target rocket will ignite.
50 miles high now, approaching 100 miles downrange.
The other voice you hear belongs to Jack Riley in Mission Control Houston. Before him, he has maps that are plotting this flight.
Liftoff time at 5 minutes, 1 second past the hour.
Everything on course for the target rocket. 3 minutes, 10 seconds after launch. Atlas-Agena on her way into space.
12,000 feet per second velocity now. 150 miles downrange, about 70 miles altitude.
He is speaking in feet per second here for the speed.
Still looking good. 3 minutes, 30 seconds.
The Agena will have to reach about 24,000 feet per second for orbital velocity. It's about half the speed now, somewhere in the neighborhood of 9,000 miles an hour.
Still getting good reports as we approach 200 miles downrange, 80 miles altitude. Velocity is building to 14,000 feet per second.
The critical moment of this powered flight of Atlas-Agena is the ignition of the Agena
Ground track
itself.
looking good.
The Agena is due to separate from the Atlas and ignite in about 1 minute and 45 seconds. Everything so far on course.
Per second now, still looking good.
This official word is coming to you from Jack Riley, Mission Control, Houston.
Coming up on Seco, sustainer engine cut off.
We should have sustainer engine cut off in 1 second.
Seco.
Now the Agena target rocket should
110
separate.
miles high now, 350 miles downrange.
The Agena should separate from the booster and ignite itself in just about 1 minute.
Seco looked good. Agena has separated from the Atlas. Agena will enter a short coast period now prior to the main engine start.
The Agena is about 135 to 40 miles high at this time. It should ignite at an altitude of 164 miles. It is looking for an orbital altitude of 185 miles above the Earth, a circular orbit. We will receive a report from Jack Riley, Mission Control, Houston, as soon as the ignition has taken place. This
Standing
is the critical
by
part.
to ignite the secondary propulsion system.
This is the
SPS
critical
start.
moment.
Provide ullage for the primary burn. Looking good. Agena's main engine has started.
This is the best news that astronauts Conrad and Gordon could have at this moment. Now, if the Agena will burn for
GPS
almost 3
burn
minutes
looks good.
without any problems, it's on the
Agena
right
approaching
course.
150 miles altitude now, 600 miles downrange. 18,000 feet per second velocity.
Jack Riley is giving his altitude in nautical miles, which are longer miles than the statutes.
Still looking good.
Actually, the Agena is more than 170 miles high at this time, about 175 statute miles. It is this big rocket engine, if the astronauts are successful in hooking up with it, that will boost them to a record altitude of 862 miles Thursday morning. Or let's make that Wednesday morning. Jack Riley reporting from Mission Control, Houston. The flight of the Atlas-Agena target rocket on schedule, on
Still
course.
looking good. 7 minutes, 38 seconds. Approaching 20,000 feet per second velocity. 160 miles altitude, 800 miles downrange. And this Agena burn is looking good.
The countdown continues on schedule on pad 19 for the Gemini 11 spacecraft. as the Agena continues to burn, placing itself into an orbit 185 miles above the Earth. So far, everything on the money. The Agena should burn for another 45 seconds. It should be approaching its altitude of 185 miles at this moment. Some 500 miles from Cape Kennedy over the Atlantic Ocean. Everything on schedule. Everything looking real good for this third attempt to send astronauts Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon into space aboard the Gemini 11.
Still looking good. Approaching the 161 nautical mile mark now in altitude.
That's
Approaching 24,000 feet per second velocity. Just a few seconds left now on this Agena burn. Coming up on the cutoff now. Mark PPS cutoff.
Now all we need is confirmation of orbit from Mr. Riley, and everything is looking beautifully here this morning. The big rocket motor aboard the Agena cut off on schedule, apparently on course.
Cutoff looked good.
Waiting for confirmation of orbit for the Agena from Jack Riley at Mission Control in Houston. If orbited, the first half of this next to the last flight in the Gemini two-man series will be off and running on this third attempt to place astronauts Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon into orbit for their 3-day mission.
We have an orbit. We do not have the numbers on it yet. We're standing by for those. But we do have an orbit with this Agena.
Well, Bob, that's what we've been waiting for. We have an orbit with the Agena. Now the big question is, Robert, whether or not it is 185 miles circular, and apparently it is from all information that we received so far. It can be 3 or 4 miles off either way and still be a good orbit for the Gemini 11 spacecraft.
Well, Jay, that was dramatic. Of course, just a few minutes before it was scheduled to lift off at 8:49, we had a hold, and that lasted several minutes because of a problem that developed not on the Atlas-Agena, but on a spacecraft in which the astronauts, Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon, were seated. They had been inserted in the spacecraft when a leak developed in the hatch on the side of the command pilot, Conrad. That problem was resolved, and after a delay of several minutes, we had the liftoff of the Atlas-Agena. And as you've indicated, we have a confirmation of orbit. Now we've got to check on the figures exactly what altitude it is in orbit. So everything is going well, and at this point now, we are about an hour away from the scheduled liftoff of the astronauts themselves. The exact time would be about a little more than an hour, a little less than an hour and a half, I should say. And the astronauts have been in the capsule for quite some time now. They were getting reports on the progress of the Atlas-Agena, and it is in orbit. The only thing we're waiting for now is confirmation from Houston to find out exactly what altitude it is in orbit. We assume that everything is all right. It was a textbook blast-off. Everything is going well in this double launch this morning from Cape Kennedy.
To use the computer on board the excursion module, and the command pilot on the lunar manned trip will have to physically dance this lunar bug right into a rendezvous and docking with the Apollo mothership. They'll have to do it themselves, so this is the first real flight in the Gemini program to demonstrate that these pilots are fast thinkers. They know how to use a computer, they know how to navigate, they know how to fly a spaceship. So that will be essentially what Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon will be out to prove today. Charles Conrad will be doing the physical flying. Richard Gordon, while he is sitting, the rookie of the flight, while he's sitting in the right seat, will be doing all the calculations with the computer and the navigation for the command pilot.
Might mention, Jay, that Conrad is the veteran in this. I think he is now 4th highest in hours logged in space by the American astronauts. On Gemini 5, which took place last August, Conrad went through 190 hours and 56 minutes in space. He was the pilot on Gemini 5. That one was commanded by Gordon Cooper. This time he is the command pilot, and Richard Gordon will be the rookie going up for the first time. And we are now at T-minus 23 minutes and counting, with blast-off scheduled to take place at 42 minutes after the hour. There will be that built-in hold, everything going well so far. The Agena target vehicle was launched an hour and 12 minutes ago. It was placed into orbit, the proper orbit, and is now over the Pacific Ocean, approaching the west coast of the North American continent. And we'll have that first rendezvous and docking operation shortly after the astronauts themselves get into space. I think this is going to be an interesting flight, Jay. Both of these astronauts, Conrad and Gordon, are very witty men, and they're loquacious. They'll be talking quite a bit. Remember, Conrad and Gordon in Collins and Young in Gemini 10 didn't talk very much at all, but these two men, we expect that they'll be doing a lot of talking. Now a report from Jack King in Gemini Control.
This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 22 minutes and counting. T-minus 22, all going well at this point in the count. The backup pilots, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Bill Anders, now here in the control center, monitoring the remainder of the count. Earlier this morning, they had spent some 4 to 4.5 hours in the Gemini 11 cockpit, making the preliminary checks before the prime crew came aboard. We now have our parameters from Houston flight, and it gives us the following numbers. We will have a hold at the T-minus 3 minute mark in the count of 2 minutes and 20 seconds duration. 2 minutes and 20 seconds duration. We'll be aiming for T-minus 0, which is ignition for the Gemini launch vehicle, at 42 minutes and 23 seconds after the hour. We should get liftoff 3 seconds thereafter, or at 42 minutes, 26 seconds. The latest orbital parameters we have for the Agena 11 are as follows: 156 by 166 nautical miles. To repeat, 156 by 166 nautical miles. This is deemed an acceptable orbit for the Agena 11. At Launch Complex 19, at the present time, we've just started the actual static test of the thrusters of the Gemini spacecraft propulsion system. There are 8 25-pound thrusters at the base of the adapter of the Gemini 11, and the crew is now firing these thrusters to make sure that they will be operating properly for launch. We test them in the following sequence: yaw left, pitch down; yaw right, pitch up; and yaw left. These are the variations that the thrusters can operate, some of the variations, and we are testing to ensure that it's working.
That report from Jack King and Gemini Control, everything proceeding well. We're about 22 minutes away from the scheduled liftoff of the astronauts, and you're listening to NBC Radio's coverage of Gemini 11. This is Robert Goralski with Jay Barbary reporting from the NBC News Space Center as we move toward a liftoff of astronauts Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon. They're scheduled to be hurled into space at 42.5 minutes after the hour, a little more than 20 minutes from now. To repeat, there will be a hold at T-minus 3. Jack King has announced that that hold will be for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Then, if all is well, the countdown will be picked up again, and the astronauts should be on their way into space at 42.5 minutes after the hour. Jay?
Bob, the Agena target rocket is just south of Hawaii now, over the Pacific Ocean, approaching the west coast of the U.S. and also approaching sunrise. It is in an orbit of 180 to 191 miles above the Earth. That's statute miles. Mr. King gave us the nautical miles a while ago. And they had wanted a circular orbit of 185 miles, and this varies 5 miles in each direction at the low point and high point of the desired orbit. And as he pointed out, this orbit is indeed acceptable for the launch. Of course, the tricky thing yet to come up is this 2-second launch window. Now, what they mean by that simply is that 2 seconds is the length of the time span in which this Titan II rocket can be triggered here for the launch. The launch crew has to hit this right on the nose, otherwise this first orbit rendezvous will not be pulled off. They only have 2 seconds. And after they go into the hold of 2 minutes and 20 seconds at T-minus 3 minutes in the countdown, and they pick up the count, at any moment, anything goes wrong that they have to hold, then it's over with. They'll have to recycle the count and try later. So they're waiting for the Agena to come up over the U.S. It will actually streak across Mexico first, skirt the southern border of the U.S. and the Gulf of Mexico, across Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. And as it approaches the west coast of Florida, the Gemini 11 should be triggered and begin its orbital flight, or its powered flight into orbit. And as the Agena, or as the Gemini 11 goes into orbit, the Agena should be some 200 miles downrange from it. I think it's 248 if my memory serves me correctly. It's somewhere in that area.
So we're 15 minutes away from the scheduled blast-off of astronauts Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon. We might add that we had two moments of suspense earlier today. We had 2 holes in the countdown. About 6:30 this morning, apparently some problems developed that were not particularly serious. They had to do with the synchronization of the clocks. There was a 4-minute hold. The countdown quickly resumed. Then about a half an hour before the scheduled liftoff of the Atlas-Agena, a problem developed in the seal of the hatch on the command pilot side of the Gemini 11 spacecraft. This is where the command pilot Conrad was sitting at that time. The hatch was sealed, but apparently a leak had developed, and the astronauts were then told that the countdown would have to be halted. And there was a delay of 16 minutes. The problem was corrected, and the countdown then resumed. And the Atlas-Agena was lifted off its pad an hour and 18 minutes ago, and we are now less than 15 minutes away from the scheduled liftoff of the astronauts. To repeat, there will be a hold. I think when Jack King announces that there's a hold at this particular time, oftentimes we misunderstand that and assume that something is wrong. Well, this is a built-in hold. This will come at T-minus 3, and according to King, this will last exactly 2 minutes and 20 seconds. If all goes well, the countdown will then be picked up again, and the astronauts should be on their way into space at 42.5 minutes after the hour.
This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 14 minutes and counting. T-minus 14, all still proceeding very well at this point with the Gemini 11 countdown. We have a report that the computer has given the update for the latest parameters of the Agena 11 in orbit. We're going to go into a hold at the T-minus 3-minute mark. The hold will be about 2 minutes and 20 seconds duration. We'll then resume the countdown, feed the latest update information to the launch vehicle guidance system and the Gemini spacecraft computer, which acts as a backup to the guidance system during the powered phase of flight, and count on down, aiming for an ignition of the Gemini launch vehicle at 42 minutes and 23 seconds after the hour. We'll have a sequence then on the pad of about 3 seconds until we get release, and those explosive bolts that hold the launch vehicle to the base of the pad are activated and the launch vehicle lifts off. So to repeat, looking for an ignition at 42 minutes and 23 seconds after the hour, with liftoff 3 seconds later. The Gemini launch vehicle test conductor has made his check of all the recovery forces that have been activated for this particular mission. They all report go. All the various aircraft and other recovery elements are in operation at this time, and we are in a go condition. We're now T-minus 12 minutes, 36 seconds and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control.
And so, as you heard from Jack King, everything is proceeding smoothly. We're about 10 minutes away now from the scheduled liftoff of astronauts Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon. In a related space story today, the New York Daily News says a new maneuverable super spy satellite is taking photos of Soviet military bases and dropping the film packages back to the United States. In a copyrighted article from Cape Kennedy, the newspaper says the satellite may have a television system which can be monitored from the ground. The news said the satellite is an improved version of a type which has been photographing Soviet and Chinese military bases for more than 5 years, the so-called SAMOS program. The countdown at Cape Kennedy for the second of today's launches of the Gemini 11 mission proceeding smoothly. As of now, unless a hitch develops, we should have the astronauts and their blast-off coming at 42 minutes after the hour, less than a little more than 10 minutes from now. The actual count is T minus 11 and a half minutes and counting, but there will be that built-in hold lasting, according to Jack King, 2 minutes and 20 seconds. If everything is going well at that point, there will be that brief pause. The countdown will be picked up at that point, and the astronauts should be taking off at 42 and a half minutes after the hour. Everything going well so far.
Bob, the Agena is approaching Guaymas, Mexico. It's on the daylight side of Earth now. As the countdown continues here, we still have a thin, cloudy overcast, and a few thunderheads are moving into the area.
Is that a new development, Jay? The weather was fairly good.
Yes, it is, and we're beginning to get some clouds into the area now, but nothing that will prevent the launch at this time. It could get serious later.
The forecasters had anticipated broken clouds, but no rain. So while we're waiting, everything proceeding smoothly at this point, we're about 12 and a half minutes away from the scheduled liftoff of astronauts Charles Conrad, Richard Gordon. Their Agena target vehicles already in space. You're listening to NBC Radio's coverage of Gemini 11 from the NBC News Space Center.
We now pause 10 seconds for station identification.
This is WMAQ AM and FM Chicago, 71 degrees, and the time now is 9:30.
This is NBC News. The flight of Gemini 11, Robert Gorelski with Jay Barbary, reporting on today's twin launches. Everything going well. Astronauts Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon about to be lifted into space a little more than 10 minutes from now. The actual countdown, T minus 9 minutes and 42 seconds and counting. There will be a built-in hold of 2 minutes and 20 seconds. If all proceeds well, the countdown will then be resumed at that point, and the astronauts will be lifted into space at 42 and a half minutes after the hour. Now we've got another report coming up shortly from Jack King and Gemini Control at Cape Kennedy. To remind you again, we'll be getting reports from Jack King until the Titan II actually is launched with the astronauts aboard. Then we'll be hearing from Jack Riley, who will be at the Houston Manned Spacecraft Center. The next report, we'll be hearing it in just a few seconds now, will be from Jack King, who is in Gemini Control at Cape Kennedy.
This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 9 minutes and counting. T-minus 9, all still going well with our countdown at this point. The command pilot for the mission, astronaut Pete Conrad, just asked for the right time, and he was given it. The command pilot wanted to make sure that all the clocks in the spacecraft were synchronized properly, and the spacecraft test conductor counted down to give him a synchronization time to get the clocks all squared away in the spacecraft. This has been accomplished, and we are proceeding. Just a matter of minutes ago, we completed one of the key tests with the radio command guidance system. This was where the guidance system did generate signals that were sent to the launch vehicle, and those two engines at the base of the Gemini launch vehicle responded to the commands by swiveling or gimbaling, as it's called. These engines will do the same maneuvers in space to keep us on the proper trajectory, working on signals from the guidance system of the launch vehicle itself. All systems still looking good as we come up on T-minus 8 minutes and counting. This is Gemini Launch Control.
That summary from Jack King, reporting from Gemini Control at Cape Kennedy, that everything is proceeding well. We're 10 minutes away now from the scheduled liftoff of astronauts Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon. They've been aboard the spacecraft now for quite some time. It's on pad 19. The Agena target vehicle is now over the Pacific Ocean, approaching the point at which it will make a similar area rendezvous with the Gemini 11 space twins. The last report we had was that the Agena target vehicle is in an orbit ranging from 179 to 191 statute miles, and that's the way it's supposed to be. They were aiming for a 185-mile high circular orbit. Jay, everything still going well?
Astronauts are inside their spacecraft now, and the erector was lowered about an hour ago from around the Gemini Titan II rocket, and is standing on its pad now, only supported by itself and being held to the ground by electrical connector circuits, through umbilical lines going into the spacecraft and the rocket stages themselves. These drop off at the moment of liftoff. They pull out, and then the spacecraft and rocket is separate and on its way into orbit. So everything is on schedule. The weather here is still very acceptable for the launch. We have a thin overcast, and we have a few clouds now moving into the area, not too many. No threat of rain or anything at this time, but it could, if they should increase later in the day, we probably will have thunder showers here. The weather has been generally messy, as the weathermen say, for the past few days here in the spaceport area.
We are now about 8 minutes away from the scheduled liftoff of the astronauts. We are at T-minus 6 minutes and counting, but there will be that brief hold lasting 2 minutes and 20 seconds that will come at T-minus 3. This is built in, it's planned, it's automatic, it will not indicate any kind of a problem. It will give the scientists and the technicians one more opportunity to check the systems to make sure that they remain go. And they have been go since we had a temporary hold prior to the launch of the Atlas-Agena. This was caused because of a leak in the hatch in the command pilot's position on the spacecraft. That problem has been corrected, and everything is proceeding smoothly at this point. We are approaching a hold at this point. It'll come at T-minus 3. At the moment, we are at T-minus 5 minutes and 20 seconds. The hold should last 2 minutes and 20 seconds. But so far, everything proceeding smoothly. The astronauts should be up on their way up in about 7 minutes. You're listening to NBC Radio's coverage of Gemini 11. This is Robert Goralski with Jay Barbary reporting on the flight of Gemini 11. And so far, everything going well. We're only minutes away from the scheduled blastoff of Navy Commander Charles Conrad, he's the command pilot, and Navy Lieutenant Commander Richard Gordon, the pilot. NBC's coverage of Gemini 11 will continue after this message. 6 minutes from now, Conrad and Gordon should be blasted into space. The countdown is continuing. No problems have developed. We're approaching a hold, however. This will be a built-in hold. It will last for a little more than 2 minutes. The technicians and the scientists will then make a final check to make sure everything is working properly. And apart from that hatch problem that developed earlier and has since been corrected, the countdown has proceeded smoothly. The Agena target vehicle was blasted off a little more than an hour and a half ago, and we're only about 6 minutes away from the liftoff of Conrad and Gordon. Everything's still proceeding satisfactorily and smoothly. Jay?
All right, Bob, everything on schedule here. We're approaching that hold in the countdown, which should last for 2 minutes and 20 seconds, as Jack King reported a few moments ago. And at that time, all of the computed guidance information will be fed into the guidance system on board the Titan II, as well as into the computer on board the Gemini 11 as the backup guidance system. And we're going to get another report now, just momentarily, from Jack King here in Gemini Launch Control.
This is Gemini Launch Control, T-minus 3 minutes and holding, T-minus 3 minutes and holding. This duration of the hold will be about 2 minutes and 21 seconds. We will then resume our countdown, aiming toward the planned ignition time of the Gemini launch vehicle of 42 minutes and 23 seconds after the hour. When we do resume our countdown, we will bring aboard the final flight parameters to the Gemini launch vehicle guidance system and the Gemini 11 spacecraft computer. This is the data that is required for this key first orbit rendezvous on the Gemini 11 mission. Now, T-minus 3 minutes and holding. This is Gemini Launch Control.
So we're at that built-in automatic hold at this point. This had been anticipated. It was announced well in advance by Jack King. It will last another minute and 20 seconds. Then the count, if all goes well, if the checkouts are satisfactory, the countdown will then be picked up and scheduled blast off at 42 minutes after the hour, which is 4 minutes from now, a little more than 4 minutes from now. The Atlas-Agena is moving into position. It's in orbit about 185 miles above the Earth. And on the first revolution of the astronauts, they will attempt to rendezvous and dock with the Agena target vehicle. We are at T-minus 3 minutes and holding. This is the built-in hold. It had been anticipated. It had been planned. Jay?
As you pointed out earlier, Bob, the astronauts will do their own computations on board the Gemini 11 for this quick first orbit rendezvous with the Agena over Hawaii in this next orbit. It'll take them about 1 hour and 20 minutes, if all goes well, for them to ease up into formation flight with the Agena. Then, as they cross over the U.S., over Texas, as a matter of fact, Command Pilot Conrad plans to nudge the nose of the Gemini 11 into the special docking collar on the Agena for the link-up between the two vehicles. And as they make these computations, they will have to do them themselves because the Agena is not in the exact orbit and that it was planned, 185. It varies a little, and this indeed changes the computations. Now for another report from Jack King.
This is Gemini Launch Control. Mark, we have resumed our countdown. Now T-minus 2 minutes, 56 seconds and counting. Coming up on T-minus 2 minutes and 50 seconds and counting. As we just come out of the hold, all situations still looking good. We're completely automatic as far as the sequencer is concerned with the Gemini launch vehicle. We have received confirmation that the launch vehicle and the spacecraft computer have received the proper parameters for the flight. Confirmation just came through. We're coming up on T-minus 2 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. We have a go from the range at this point, the supervisor range operations, that we are clear to launch. As we get down here in the final moments of the countdown, we'll open the various pre-valves that permit the fuel in the oxidizer to come down toward the thrust chamber in the first stage. There's one valve left, and that's a thrust chamber valve, which will open when we reach zero in the countdown to permit the fuel and oxidizer to ignite. Now coming up on T-minus 2 minutes. Mark, T-minus 2 minutes and counting, T-minus 2. We continue to check in the blockhouse to make sure that we are getting the proper readouts. T-minus 1 minute, 50 seconds and counting. Still going well at this point. We'll be coming up on the important power transfer in about 10 seconds or so. This is when we go on internal power in the Gemini launch vehicle. The Gemini spacecraft went internal about 10 minutes earlier, completely on internal power.
Well, as Jack King reported, all is apparently ready on Launch Pad 19 here as astronauts Charles Pete Conrad and Richard Gordon wait inside their spacecraft. They're waiting to be rocketed into space. The Agena target rocket is now over the Gulf of Mexico. It's moving through space at 5 miles a second, and when it moves over the state of Florida, the Titan II rocket will be triggered to begin the astronauts' chase around the world. They hope to catch the target satellite over Hawaii. We're now 1 minute from liftoff of the Gemini Titan 11, and as always, thousands of workers here on the spaceport are out to watch the astronauts launched into space. The weather is beautiful for a launch. We have a thin, cloudy overcast, a few clouds moving into the area, but we should have a better view, actually, of the Gemini 11 launch than we did of the Atlas-Agena launch an hour and a half ago. At the moment, the astronauts are on their backs in the Gemini 11 spacecraft. They're looking up at this partly cloudy sky. The surf is rolling in from the ocean. It's just a short distance from the launch pad, and there are rescue helicopters circling over the Atlantic. They're there just in case that they're needed. The Agena target rocket is approaching the west coast of Florida. We switch now to Space Agency spokesman Jack King in Gemini Launch Control.
15 seconds and counting. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have ignited.
The two big rocket motors in the first stage of the Titan II have ignited, and astronauts Charles Pete Conrad and Richard Gordon are on their way into space. The liftoff is clean and beautiful. As the silver rocket, it's covered with white and black stripes. Near its center, it's climbing into this partly cloudy Florida sky. The rocket's roar is at its peak now, and the sound is being swept across our NBC observation balcony by a breeze from the ocean. Let's listen to it. Titan II's big rocket motors are spouting 430,000 pounds of thrust as it pushes astronauts Charles Pete Conrad and Richard Gordon toward their rendezvous with the target rocket. Apparently they got off right on schedule in that 2-second window. We have already lost sight of the Gemini Titan II rocket as it climbed through the thin clouds here over the Cape. We are getting reports from Jack Riley in Mission Control in Houston. Let's switch to him.
Approaching 6 miles altitude, 4 miles downrange.
You're listening to Jack Riley coming in from the Mission Control Center in
time,
Houston.
42 minutes, 27 seconds after the hour.
And we just might, here in a few seconds, get the voices of the astronauts. If the voices are coming in clean, you will hear them come in the background, and of course we'll listen to it. There they are. You're hearing the transmission from the spacecraft.
Roger, DCS. Guidance update has just gone up to the spacecraft.
This conversation from the Gemini 11 is actually coming to you slightly delayed, about 5 seconds.
Polling his controllers for a staging status. Houston, you're a go for staging. 11 is go.
Conrad saying 11 is go for staging. That will be coming up in about 10 seconds from this point.
28 miles altitude.
This is where the first stage of the Titan II separates from its second stage.
Roger, DCS. Engine ignition.
That was Conrad saying we have engine ignition on the second stage.
Ignition.
The guidance system should have kicked in by now on the second stage.
Guidance initiate.
There it is. Conrad says he has the guidance.
Roger. That's looking good. Second stage guidance has initiated.
The guidance should be in complete
We're 50
control.
miles high now and approaching 120 miles downrange.
This rocket lifted off right on the button.
Houston, your steering looks good.
That's astronaut Charles Conrad, the command pilot of this flight. You're hearing it broadcast from the spaceship as she heads for orbit. It's coming through the Mission Control Center in Houston. The voice from that control center is Jack Riley. Everything is on schedule.
We're right down the middle, Flight Dynamics says.
They're about 2 minutes now from the end of their rocket ride where the
Approaching
Gemini
70 miles altitude, 200 miles downrange.
Where the Gemini 11 will be inserted into orbit.
Ground track looking good.
Coming up here in 10 seconds, Conrad will tell the ground whether or
Flight
not all
director taking a
systems look
status
good.
check for SECO. Gemini 11, this is Houston. Your go, over.
There you are. Conrad says we're go. This is a beautiful flight.
80 miles high now, 280 miles downrange.
Just 4 minutes and 45 seconds ago, they were sitting on the ground here at Cape Kennedy. Now they're 80 miles into space. This rocket ride has been a beautiful one. So far, right down the pickle barrel.
We'll be coming up on point 8 shortly, that point at which 80% of required thrust is achieved.
That should be in 10 seconds. 80% of the necessary speed to go into orbit. At this point, in case the rocket should burn out,
good.
Conrad could fire his own rocket power to go on into orbit.
Stand by for point 8. Mark, point 8.
Point 8. It's Conrad's voice from the
We
Gemini
have
11.
80% of thrust now and building on up.
Second stage of the Titan II
We have
should have
Seco.
burned out. There it is, Seco, second stage cutoff. About 5 or 10 seconds, the spacecraft will separate from the Titan.
Roger, Gemini 11, your go for M equal 1.
M equal 1, they're go for the first orbit rendezvous.
And good rail is RDOT desired is +1, over.
Right now at this time, Charles Conrad will fire his own rocket power to increase his speed about 20 miles an hour. This is the first physical
Gemini 11,
action.
RDOT desired +1.
He did it. There you go. The first to burn, and he's on his way for a rendezvous with the Agena satellite over Hawaii. Everything right on the money. A beautiful launch, beautiful description from the astronaut
RDOT
himself.
refers to the radius rate, the up-down burn.
The astronaut should be in an orbit now of 174 miles above the Earth at its high point with a low point of 100 miles. They should be at this low point at this moment 100 miles over the South Atlantic, moving down across
Telemetry
the
shows the
Bahama chain.
spacecraft still burning. Roger.
Conrad reporting on the completion of the burn, the first one made by his onboard rockets for the rendezvous over Hawaii. A little more than 1 hour and about 1 hour and 12 minutes from this time, the rendezvous should be completed. The Gemini 11 is now 240 miles behind the Agena 11 and is gaining on the target with greater speed of about 535 miles per hour. Physically, the Gemini 11 is traveling over the Caribbean, down the Bahama Island chain at this time, across the Lesser Antilles. Well, Robert, I've tried to call you Bobbit. This number 3 temp turned out to be the one. Everything right on the nose.
Houston, your liftoff was 1/2 second late.
1.5 seconds left.
Roger, fairings jettison, over. Fairings jettison, over.
These are the voices of the astronauts you're hearing. That was incredible. They were a half second off. They had a 2-second window, and you could use every superlative to describe this morning's second launch and the first as well, really. The 2-second window. They had to get that Titan II off within a 2-second period, and they did it, and they missed it by a half second. That's incredible.
It's terrific. I don't think they'll bring them back and try it over again, though, because they're a half a second late.
Jay, I might add, the astronauts are going to be working here on they're working right now, of course, but they're going to be working on the rendezvous. The first maneuver will actually take place in about 40 minutes from now. And about 40 minutes from now, they'll be about 20 miles away behind the Agena target vehicle. And at that point, they'll be on the dark side of the Earth. We're about 40 minutes away from the first maneuver toward rendezvous and about an hour and 15 minutes away from the rendezvous itself. Right now, the Gemini 11 spacecraft is behind the Agena, but catching up. And this is where we get into the problem, Jay, of how you actually slow down to pick up speed, don't you? This is the complicated factor. Can you explain that again?
Well, all I can tell you is, being in this lower orbit, their speed is actually 535 miles per hour greater than the Agena 11. And they will be catching up with it at all times here because of the shorter orbit. And their speed around the face of the Earth is 535 miles per hour greater than that of the Agena, and that's because the Agena is in the higher orbit. But they will be gaining at all times and should ease into formation flight with the Agena over Hawaii shortly after, or right at sunrise, rather, on the daylight side of Earth.
It was rather amusing. Houston informed the astronauts in the understated, characteristic manner of the space agency, with obviously a great touch of pride, that they were lifted off only a half second off their planned liftoff time. The astronauts are now over the Atlantic. They're chasing the Agena target vehicle. They were launched into space about 11 minutes ago. So far, everything is going well with Gemini 11. We tried on Friday. We had a problem. We tried to get on Saturday, but this morning we did it. We had 2 holes in the countdown, one because of a problem that was not serious at all, one that we thought could develop into a problem, and that was the seal around the hatch on the command pilot side of the spacecraft. That leak was quickly, that problem, we think it was a leak, was quickly corrected, and they went off on schedule. There's a bit of a delay. There was a 16-second hold because of that hatch problem. So it didn't come off quite on schedule. Though, as we've indicated before, they had quite a bit of time to play around with, an hour and a half, but the actual window was only 2 seconds. It was exactly at that point that these men went up. They were only off a half second. Truly an incredible space feat. Jay, how far are the astronauts behind the Agena target vehicle at this point?
About 200 miles at this point, closing at all times. They're approaching sunset. They will be moving into the sunset in about 26 minutes from now, and sunset for them will take place over the Indian Ocean. They are now over the central Atlantic Ocean, approaching the west coast of Africa, and will actually skirt part of the African coast before going over the southern tip of Africa and approaching the Mozambique Channel in the Malagasy Republic.
We're 38 minutes away from the first maneuver toward the rendezvous. That will take place after they've been in flight about 50 minutes. They've been up now for about 13 minutes. That first maneuver in the sequence take place when the Agena is about 20 and a half miles away from the Gemini 11 spacecraft. Take place in the dark.
This is, as you point out, is the first major maneuver. They made their actual first rendezvous maneuvers just 20 seconds after they separated from the second stage of the Titan II, and they had to know at that time just how long this burn on their rocket power would have to be to set this up. So they were doing some fast calculating, and so far everything appears good. It appears to be on the money, and we're going to continue here with our live coverage, Bob, and follow this critical first orbit rendezvous, because so very much hinges on whether or not these pilots are fast enough, quick enough to pull off this first rendezvous over Hawaii, dock with the Agena over Texas on this first revolution. If they are, if they do indeed pull it off, then this mission can go ahead as planned for the spacewalk, for the 862-mile plunge into deep space, all of the highlights of the flight yet to come. If the first orbit rendezvous fails, then it's a real-time flight plan, as they call it here at the spaceport, which simply means we'll figure it out from here.
Well, Jay, everything went well this morning after those 2 momentary delays. We had that hold for 16 minutes because of the leak on the command pilot's hatch, but that problem was corrected, and the men got into space. And at this moment, The astronauts, Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon, are moving along beautifully in the flight of Gemini 11. They're chasing the Agena target vehicle, and they'll be going into a rendezvous operation, a docking operation, a very complicated first rendezvous for these two astronauts. And, of course, it'll be a 3-day flight. There are many experiments they'll conduct. They'll attempt to establish an altitude record of 862 miles. They'll link the Agena and the Gemini 11 spacecraft together at opposite ends of a 100-foot-long cord. And at the end of 71 hours and 8 minutes, they should be back on Earth again after performing the world's first automatic re-entry. So all in all, a highly eventful flight. They got off exactly on schedule. They had a 2-second window, and they made it without the least bit of difficulty, despite the 16-minute hold. Actually, they were only a half-second off from their blast-off from Cape Kennedy.
A beautiful flight so far, Bob, without a doubt. And we have a lot to look forward to during the next 44 revolutions of Gemini 11 around the Earth. And if everything is carried out in this mission as planned, the astronauts Charles Conrad and Richard Gordon will bring back to Earth a tremendous amount of new information on manned spaceflight. It is so necessary in this test-bed two-manned series known as Gemini to send 3 astronauts to the moon. And the most important part to the Apollo flight is actually this first orbit rendezvous that is physically taking place now.
Well, Jay, we'll continue with NBC Radio's comprehensive coverage of the flight of Gemini 11. We'll have progress reports, and we'll be back in about an hour from now with a full report on the rendezvous and docking operation. This is Robert Goralski with Jay Barbary reporting on the flight of Gemini 11 from the NBC News Space Center.
Complete coverage of the rendezvous and docking in space today on NBC Radio and Television.
Houston, that's beautiful. This has got to be one of the most proud moments of my life, I guarantee you.